The psalmist wrote in Psalm 74:9, "We see not our signs, there is no more any prophet, neither is there among us any that knoweth how long." Even though nothing more was written in the Bible after the prophecies of Malachi and before the time of the birth of Jesus, the history of Jerusalem continued on. The Babylonian Empire controlled Jerusalem from about 607 BC until 539 BC. Then the Medo-Persian Empire took control of Jerusalem a little before it gained control of Babylon and controlled it for a little over 200 years, from 539 BC until 332 BC, when Alexander the Great went to Jerusalem. He became the king of Macedonia, a region of Greece, when his father Philip II was assassinated. The Macedonian Empire was strong enough and wealthy enough that it enabled Alexander to go on and defeat the Persians. Bible scholars have called the bronze or brass section of Nebuchadnezzar's great image the Grecian Empire of Alexander the Great. We have to wonder at this point, if this is not written in the Bible, why am I teaching anything about an empire that has nothing to do with the Bible? It has been said, to understand Bible prophecy, you have to know and understand history. You have to know the history of these regions in order to understand the prophecies in the book of Daniel. How did the Grecian Empire affect Jerusalem? Here is the story. The high priest in Jerusalem had reason to fear Alexander's coming to Jerusalem, for when Alexander besieged Tyre, he sent a letter asking the high priest to send reinforcements and supplies to help him defeat Darius. But the high priest refused, as he had made an oath with Darius that he would not take up arms against him. This made Alexander angry, and he was determined to go against the high priest. Before Alexander headed for Jerusalem, the high priest had a dream from God that the priest and the people should go out to meet Alexander when they saw him coming, and that this would go well for them. When Alexander saw them coming to meet him, he went unaccompanied to the high priest. James Ussher says, "After Alexander had prostrated himself before that God whose name he saw engraved on the golden plate of the high priest mitre, he greeted him. The priest went before Alexander as he entered Jerusalem. Alexander went up to the temple and sacrificed to God in the manner which the priest showed him. The priest showed him the book of the prophet Daniel, in which it was written that a Greek should come and destroy the Persians. Alexander did not doubt, but that he was the one in the prophecy." Josephus adds that Alexander did as he did because God had given him a dream beforehand, and the high priest who came out of the city to meet him was dressed exactly like the man in Alexander's dream. Even the mitre on the high priest's head was exactly the same, with the name of God on it. Because of both of the dreams of the high priest and Alexander, Alexander gave Jerusalem what was requested by the priest, and Alexander honored the laws of the Jewish people, and there was peace during this time. When Alexander died, his kingdom was divided among 5 of his generals. Antigonus was Alexander's most powerful general and was given the region of Macedonia. Seleucus was given Syria and Mesopotamia. Ptolemy got Egypt. Cassander received Greece, Turkey, and the Ottoman Empire, and Lysimachus controlled North Africa. Israel was caught in the middle between Syria and Egypt. These 5 warred against each other for long periods of time. When Antigonus was slain in battle in 301 BC, his territory went to Seleucus. With Palestine being located between Syria and Egypt, the control of Jerusalem interchanged between the Seleucids of Syria and the Ptolemies of Egypt. If there were 5 generals, why are there only 4 noted in this timeline? It's because of Daniel's vision in 8:21-22. The rough goat with the great horn was broken, and 4 stood up for it. For more than 300 years, these people groups ruled over Palestine. The Syrians, who were the Seleucids, the Egyptians, who were the Ptolemies, the Maccabees, or the Asmoneans, and the Romans, and then the Arabs, who were the Muslims. When Alexander had taken control of the many different nations that became the Grecian Empire, he had introduced the Greek language and culture into Palestine and in all the other places he had conquered. This became the language of the New Testament. So, when the New Testament was written in Greek and the Old Testament had already been translated into Greek, which was called the Septuagint, then a very large area of peoples knew the Greek language and could understand the Word of God. Daniel had prophesied of Alexander the Great in Daniel 8:5. Suddenly, a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had 2 horns, and he ran unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and broke his 2 horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Daniel 8:21 through 24 interprets who the goat would be. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, 4 kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. And he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. In verse 20 is the beginning of the interpretation. The ram and the goat are past history, which is linked to future prophecy. It's a foreshadowing of the Antichrist to come. The prophecy starts out speaking of Alexander the Great, but moves forward to the fulfillment of the Antichrist to come. I think it does indicate that the Antichrist will come out of the land area that was the Grecian Empire in Alexander's reign, for it says, in the latter time of their kingdom, the kingdom of the 4. Also, the ram that Alexander defeated was the Medo-Persian Empire, which Daniel prophesied in verses 3 through 4. Then I lifted up my eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him. Neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will and became great. Daniel 8:20 interprets who the ram would be. The ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia. The king of Media was Darius. The king of Persia was Cyrus. At this point, the Babylonian Empire has ended. The Medo-Persian Empire has ended. Alexander is dead, and his 4 generals control all of Alexander's kingdom. I said that control of Palestine interchanged between rulers. Ptolemy of Egypt seized Jerusalem without a fight because it was a Sabbath day for the Jews, and they did not take up arms to protect the city. Ptolemy had come into the city supposedly to offer sacrifices. He gained the city and was a cruel ruler. He took many captives from Jerusalem and Judea to Egypt. Now, Egypt and Syria were connected by intermarriages. Cleopatra was an example. She was a daughter of Antiochus of Syria and married Ptolemy of Egypt. This was not the Cleopatra who fell in love with Mark Antony. There were several Cleopatras. These 2 Cleopatras were 100 years apart. A person named Ptolemy Epiphanes is an example of the connection between Syria and Egypt. This person, also called Antiochus IV Epiphanes, sometimes Epimanes, meaning the madman. In the period between 171 to 167 BC, this Antiochus attacked and captured Jerusalem, plundered the temple, sacrificed swine on the altar, placed an abominable idol of Zeus on the altar, and compelled the Jews to forsake the Jewish religion by tormenting them. Daniel prophesied of this person who would fulfill part of the Daniel 8 prophecy of the little horn, but the prophecy would be ultimately fulfilled in the Antichrist who is yet to come and will again do in the temple what Antiochus Epiphanes did over 2,000 years ago. The great image of Nebuchadnezzar's dream was a witness to the head of gold, the Babylonian Empire, to the shoulders and arms of silver, the Medo-Persian Empire, and to the belly and thighs of bronze, the Grecian Empire. The next part of the great image was the legs of iron, which represented the Roman Empire. During this period of time, what happened with the priest? The priesthood remained in power, but it became corrupted. Jada was the last high priest mentioned in the Old Testament. He died around 301 BC. The priests who succeeded Jada were Onias, Simon the Just, Eleazar, Manasseh, Onias II, Simon II, and Onias III. Then Jason, the son of Simon II, coveted the high priesthood of Onias III, his brother, so he paid Antiochus to give him that position. When he became priest, he abandoned the ancient Jewish customs and institutions and led them into every conceivable iniquity. In the same way that Jason usurped the priesthood, Menelaus did as well. After Menelaus, Alcimus was appointed by the king. When he died, Jerusalem did not have a high priest for 7 years. It is unknown who held the position of high priest until Jonathan Aphus, the first of the Hasmonean dynasty, who possibly acted as the high priest. Then the priesthood line is unconfirmed.